Welcome to the Holy Post. The term Judeo-Christian has been used by the religious right for decades as a positive shorthand for biblical values in the culture. So why are conservative Christians now rejecting the label? And why are Christian defenses of slavery and the Confederacy gaining popularity 160 years after the Civil War? Today, Phil, Kaitlyn, and I explain how the rising influence of Christian nationalism is driving both trends. Then J. Ross Wagner, editor of the book Being Christian After the Desolation of Gaza, talks to me about how both American and Palestinian Christians are reexamining evangelical support for Israel. Also this week, a woman has been hiding in the New Testament for nearly 2,000 years, and there's a new horror movie about a teenage Jesus. What could possibly go wrong? If you've been waiting for the right time to join Holy Post Plus, it's finally here. We're offering a special discount for Black Friday. Right now, you can get 50% off your membership. It's our best sale of the year. You're probably wondering, what do I get with a membership to Holy Post Plus? Honestly, there's so much I don't have time to list it all, but here is a snapshot. You'll get exclusive shows like Getting Schooled by Kaitlyn Chess, 66 Verses to Explain the Bible by Esau McCauley, full episodes of the Skye Pod every Friday, My Hill to Die On, the Holy Post Book Club, exclusive access to my latest book, The World Born in You, live streams, special merch, behind-the-scenes content, bonus interviews. It goes on and on. We literally post new content 5 days a week on Holy Post Plus. It's where all of our best stuff goes. And this week, we're launching a brand new show called Advice-ish. You're going to hear more about that later in this episode. So head over to holypost.com right now to learn more and to get 50% off of your membership. Or if you're already a member, then give the gift of smart, faithful, and entertaining pro-Christian content to someone else with a gift subscription to Holy Post Plus. Okay, here is episode 697.
Hey there, welcome to the Holy Post Podcast. I'm Phil Vischer. I'm here. Kaitlyn Chess is back. Hi, Kaitlyn.
Hi, Phil.
Great to have you back.
Thanks. Great to be back.
And Skye Jitani.
Hi.
Hi. So we told everyone you were home in California.
Wrong. Incorrect. Both of my parents who listened to the show texted me around the same time. They said you're in California. You're not in California. It's like, I'm sorry.
Well, if you don't tell us, we don't know.
I know. I didn't.
We didn't know your parents moved.
They had just moved like days before I went to see them.
And they're thinking that we should know that instinctually.
They just give me their feedback on the show.
Oh, okay.
Whatever it is, however they feel.
California. Where do they live now?
Washington, D.C.
Oh, what's there? What's in Washington?
Lots of things. You can see the Washington Monument from their backyard.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
That's like Sarah Palin seeing Russia from her backyard.
Same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing.
It's just the same thing. And Skye Jitani. Hi, Skye.
Hi.
Hi. Have your parents moved?
No.
No? Neither have mine. They're
Good to know.
same place. Yeah, they don't. Your parents are a little more mobile.
Yeah, do you have to check in
I'm
before you go
younger than
home?
you.
Like, where are you guys?
Now, where am I going?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they move a lot. They do move pretty regularly.
Yeah.
It's a little strange to people to realize that there's nowhere in the country that is like where I grew up.
Yeah. When's your dad going to retire from the military to do what he really wants to do with his life?
I think this is really what he wants to do with his life.
You think this is it?
I think he's in
you
it
think
for,
he found his
for a
calling?
while. I think he found his calling, yeah.
Hey, that's cool. It's time for the theme song.
What's the news that you like the most? Who's your favorite podcast host? If it's breakfast, get your toast. It's Skye, Phil, Kaitlyn, and the Holy Post. Skye, Phil, Kaitlyn, and the Holy Post.
And sometimes other people.
The Holy Post is sponsored by Blueland Bedding. I don't know about you, but I do much better when I've gotten a good night's sleep. The whole world looks a little brighter. When our daughter needed to improve her sleep, we got her a new mattress from Blueland Bedding, and she loves it. Made in America and sold direct to you. It's a high-end mattress experience without the sky-high price. Pick your firmness, your height and dimensions, and get free shipping from their factory in Arizona. Upgrade to Cloud Pillow Top. It's like a pillow that's a cloud on top. Try your new Blueland Bedding mattress for up to 120 nights. If you don't love it as much as we do, they'll help you return it or pick out a different one. You've got nothing to lose except a bad night's sleep. Go to BrooklynBedding.com and use our promo code HOLYPOST at checkout to get 30% off site-wide. This offer is not available anywhere else. That's BrooklynBedding.com and promo code HOLYPOST for 30% off site-wide. Support our show and let them know we sent you after checkout. BrooklynBedding.com, promo code HOLYPOST. The Holy Post is sponsored by PolicyGenius. If you've got people relying on you, you should probably have life insurance. You know that, right? But with prices on just about everything going up these days, you might assume life insurance will be more than you can afford, and you're most likely wrong. 72% of Americans overestimate the actual cost of life insurance. Protecting your family doesn't have to cost a bunch if you know how to shop for the right insurance policy. And that's where PolicyGenius comes in. They don't sell life insurance. They help you shop for life insurance. They do the hard work of finding the right policy for your needs and your budget. PolicyGenius helps you compare options by getting quotes from America's top insurers in just a few clicks. And you'll get a call from a licensed agent to help you work through all the quotes and walk you through the whole process. Really, I tried it and it was really easy. Secure your family's future with PolicyGenius. Head to policygenius.com/holypost to compare life insurance quotes from top companies and see how much you could save. That's policygenius.com/holypost. This episode is sponsored by Blueland. When our kids were little, keeping the house clean became really important. Why? Because they licked stuff. They put everything in their mouths. The candy is on the floor. Wait, now it's back in their mouth. Lisa didn't just want our house clean. She wanted it mom clean. Clean enough for kids whose little fingers were everywhere. And then back in their mouths. That's why we recommend switching to Blueland. Their products are made to meet the highest environmental standards. They aren't just clean, they're mom clean. Blueland products are 100% plastic free and made with certified clean ingredients that are safe to use around the little ones we care about so much. You don't have to choose between the safe option and what actually gets your house clean. Try their dishwasher tablets, laundry tablets, or toilet tablets. Proven effective and completely plastic free. And Blueland has a special offer for Holy Post listeners. Right now, get 15% off your first order by going to blueland.com/holypost. You won't want to miss this. Blueland.com/holypost for 15% off. That's blueland.com/holypost to get 15% off. Did you hear about the new movie?
I think we got a few, yeah.
It's a first. Hey, have you know the horror movies like with Winnie the Pooh in them?
Yeah, because they've gone
Mickey
public
Mouse,
domain.
because the characters have gone public domain. So there's like one guy who's making Disney character public domain horror movies. Here's a new one in that model, a new Jesus horror movie.
Is Jesus in the public domain?
I think he is. I think Jesus is in the public domain.
Yeah.
What is that rule? It's 70 years after you've died, right?
Yeah, but it got extended a couple of times. Disney was getting it extended regularly by lobbying Congress. So it's close. It's close to 100 now. In fact,
100
I think
years.
It is 100.
I think Jesus been around longer than 100 years.
Yeah, Jesus has been around 100 years. There's a new movie called The Carpenter's Son, starring Nick Cage. Nick Cage does not play Jesus. Nick Cage plays Joseph. And it's a Jesus horror movie. Isn't that exciting? Amid a proliferation of family-friendly Bible movies and TV shows, it's striking to come across a film like R-rated The Carpenter's Son. Its premise, what if Jesus had been tempted as a teenager and his parents, especially his father, couldn't deal with it?
Sounds very relatable.
It's described as a biblical horror movie. An opening title card announces that the film is based on the infancy gospel of Thomas, an apocryphal text from the mid to late 2nd century. The gospel in question portrays Jesus as a young, undisciplined child who flexes his power a little too freely and is reprimanded by Joseph.
Ooh.
Yeah, he brings in that gospel, he brings birds to life. Whee!
Oh, I've heard that. Yeah.
And I think he kills a child. Yeah, he strikes another child dead supernaturally. So they really picked up on that part of the theme.
I'm sure you had it coming.
And ran with it. The film follows Joseph, Nick Cage, Mary, played by FKA Twigs.
I don't get that.
Oh, whoa.
I think that's a rapper.
Yeah, what?
FKA?
FKA Twigs.
You don't sound that out.
I'm not gonna. And Jesus, played by Noah Jupe from A Quiet Place.
He's good.
He's
a good actor.
As they move to a new town in Roman Egypt, still on the run at least 15 years after Jesus was born, Joseph says in a voiceover that calamity follows them, and they have been driven from every home. So Joseph boards up the windows and scatters sand outside the door to protect their new home from neighbors and evil spirits.
Isn't that what they do in A Quiet Place? They put sand everywhere so they can walk quietly?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't think that's why they I think this was
A little
based in-
syncretistic.
in some ancient Near Eastern practice. Jesus is haunted by nightmares of his death and resurrection that leave him screaming in the middle of the night. And then he's tempted by a girl at rabbi school, rabbinical school or something.
What's a girl doing there?
That's a good question. To do some things with his powers that would be bad. Turns out she represents Satan in the story.
Women.
And she torments the family.
Okay.
Are you intrigued? Do you want to see it?
I do actually now.
I don't know.
Christianity Today wasn't overly impressed. They said, in the end, we need to feel the story connects to the biblical Jesus somehow, that it portrays him as the Messiah we know and love, and the carpenter's son doesn't do that. It begins by telling us that the apocryphal Gospels, quote, describe events missing in the timeline of the New Testament. But at times, it feels as if the film is taking place in a different dimension entirely.
So what's the horror aspects of this?
Well, a kid kills another kid.
There's some killing.
Happens in Harry Potter, too. We don't call that a horror.
There's some killing, and there's some scary demonic stuff involving like things people see or experience because of the little Satan girl. You know, a little Satan girl. That's the stuff that
That's scary.
horror
That's very
films are made of.
scary.
Okay.
Don't you think? I don't know, Skye. I think you should go see it and report back to
We
us.
have a long history of talking about movies that we've not seen on this podcast.
Yeah.
So why break that stream
Yeah.
now, right?
So give us your review next week, but don't see it first.
Right.
Oh my gosh.
You'd see it though.
I wanna see it now.
What's the Midnight Mass? What's the
Midnight Mass.
Yeah, that TV show.
Yeah.
Yeah, you love
Very
that.
religious horror thing. I
Very
would love
religious.
this.
I think that's different than Jesus.
Oh yeah. I mean,
Oh, yeah, definitely.
it actually reminds me more of Mother, the horror movie that has all these Christian themes. It's Darren Aronofsky. It's like similar in that it's sacrilegious. Like it's a distortion of the Christian story. But I really like that one in part because it does distort elements of the Christian story, but it also kind of dramatically exaggerates some of them in a way that I think is helpful to make you feel uncomfortable with some things that are actually true about the Christian story. So I would be curious if this is similar.
I just think it's kind of weird that it's based on a non-canon gospel.
Well, but
There's some cool stuff in those.
Yeah, but
it's hard to make a horror movie out of the gospels
Exactly.
that we have.
That's what my whole point.
But it's like Dan Brown. If you find some extra, you know, you can
Yeah.
say, "Oh, this is supposed to be in there, but they didn't like it, so I'm going to tell my story about this, and it's going to go."
And this fits Phil's whole thing about flipping who's the good guy and the bad guys. Like people will love a story where it's like, was Jesus actually not as perfect as you thought he was?
Yeah, sure. He brought birds to life, but then he ate them.
And he accidentally killed some people.
Okay, in related news, and this is more biblical news. We got some good biblical news this week. Besides our first good biblical horror movie.
Should we just, like, to be clear, say we don't believe Jesus did those things as a child?
He ate the birds.
I just want to put it out there that, like,
that he
officially
brought to
the Holy
life.
Post
Okay, we do not.
doesn't agree with the infancy gospel.
We
comments.
agree that
Thank you,
the
Kaitlyn.
Yeah, just wanna put it out there.
apocryphal gospels are in fact apocryphal and excluded from the canon for a reason. Okay, we just went on the record.
Jesus,
So we're
God,
good.
perfect, didn't do these things.
Right.
Yeah.
He, as far as we know. Right.
Yeah.
Researchers, this is interesting. Researchers restore long-lost Greek woman to the Bible after 2,000 years. Did you have
That's
time
a
to
long
read this
time to
story?
be wandering.
I read this a few days ago when I saw it online first.
A Brigham Young University researcher says he's recovered the name of a woman whose identity vanished from the Bible for nearly 2 millennia. According to new findings, the woman addressed in 2 John, and this is 2 John verse 1, the elder to the elect lady and her children, whom I love in truth, not only I, but also all who know the truth. Love the elect lady and her children. My commentary says probably represents a church.
Right. That's what
Right.
everyone's been told forever.
Yes. Brigham Young University researcher Lincoln Blumell, Associate Dean of Research at the BYU Department of Ancient Scriptures, argues that an early copying mistake in Greek manuscripts erased her actual name. He says scribes accidentally dropped 2 Greek letters at the end of the woman's name, who he believes should properly be read eklekti. Those letters sat directly beside the identical Greek article that means the. And since there's no spaces or punctuation in the original text, there was a repeat of these 2 Greek letters that he believes a scribe dropped, thinking it was a mistake. The original line, according to Blumel, would have read, the elder to eclecti, the lady, and instead was changed to the elder to the elect lady. This is big.
Very big.
It's what?
Is it?
What'd you make that? It means a whole book of the Bible was written to a woman.
A particular woman.
An epistle.
Yeah.
An epistle. Paul wrote an epistle to a particular woman.
And her children.
You of all people, Kaitlyn. Do not care?
I'm
this is
dispositionally suspicious of we've missed or messed up something fundamental in the Bible for all of this time until this exact moment.
How often have you used that phrase before? Dispositionally suspicious.
This might be the first time.
I think that's a fascinating phrase. Kaitlyn Chess. Dispositionally suspicious.
I just think, especially in biblical studies, anytime there is a development, someone's publishing a book or an article and they're like, whoa, no one has ever noticed this one thing before. I just always want us to be like, maybe that could be true, but like, maybe don't get too excited too fast.
Okay, but
my point.
He has discovered occurrences of this exact name, electi.
Yeah.
In contemporary writing.
I'm very open to this being true. I think it changes everything. I think as an academic, I just want to be like, I want to wait till other experts in these kinds of manuscripts tell me if he's really legit on this or not.
So you're not going to take it just because it's one guy?
One guy wrote a book. He could be right. He could be great. I just don't. And to be honest, would that be awesome if this is true? I would love that. I think it would be great.
Yeah, we can name our daughters electi.
That's what I was just going to say. There's going to be a whole slate of Calvinists having daughters named electi now.
Oh my gosh. I don't think theologically this changes that much for us. So that's my other.
I don't think it changes a ton theologically.
Very interesting. I just want to be on the record that I think this is cool. And if it gets the kind of academic credentializing that I hope it does, then great, excited, very cool. But I'm just a little bit suspicious.
Whether John wrote this letter to a church or to a woman, the message is the same, kind of.
Yeah, and I don't know that telling a complementarian who doesn't think that women should lead in the church that this letter was written to a woman necessarily. It's not like it changes the theology or interpretation of other passages or other, theological emphases that they have. So it's another piece of a long list of pieces of evidence that women have been valued and taken seriously and had positions of, in sometimes, leadership and influence and authority. But it by itself, I don't think radically changes very much.
You don't think it changes? It turns the tide?
No.
And Al Mohler is going to start attending a church with a woman pastor?
I would love if he did, but I don't think so.
Electi?
Only if she's named Electi. So in 25 years... he can go to that church.
You see Al Mohler at the age of 100. No, he's my age. At the age of... Yeah, we're the same age. Al Mohler and I. Which seems
you were about to make a joke about him being so old.
Yeah, I know. That wasn't great, was it? So when he's 80, you see him sitting under the teaching of a 25-year-old pastor.
No.
I don't.
But I do. You know what? Listen.
Yeah.
I believe anything could happen. And I actually love the idea that maybe 80-year-old Al Mohler would at least be sitting under the teaching of a woman.
Oh.
Maybe he changes.
Okay. Because of dementia?
No.
Oh my gosh.
No. Because of sanctification.
Oh, it's such a fine line. Was Grandpa's behaving better? Is it sanctification or dementia?
No.
Hard to tell. Hey, everybody. We have a new segment called Advice-ish on Holy Post Plus. It is honest advice with disclaimers. It is news. You send us questions and answers could come from Skye, could come from Kaitlyn, Esau. We also have questions being answered by Sharon Hottie Miller, Malcolm Foley, Derwin Gray, none from Phil yet, but it could happen. Who knows? There are new episodes every week of Advice-ish, but only on Holy Post Plus. But if you sign up this week and take advantage of our Black Friday sale, you get half off your membership. That's right. There's a Black Friday sale this week. Half off your membership to Holy Post Plus. And one of the things you will get is Advice-ish, our new advice column, video column. One more thing. The first episode is titled, Should I Go to Thanksgiving with My MAGA Family?
These are real questions that came in.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're not making this up.
Yeah, we're not making this
We'll
up.
give you
making
the
this up.
name. We'll tell you it's from this person.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
real people.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Their phone number, their
they get-
email, their no.
Send us a question and we'll dox you. But it's all for a good cause. All for a good cause. Anyway, check out Advice-ish on Holy Post Plus. The death of Judeo-Christianity. This is big.
Whoa.
I grew up hearing all about Judeo-Christian values. That's what America was built on. Judeo-Christian values, the Judeo-Christian ethic. This is what we're fighting to maintain. This is what we don't want people to kick out of schools. It was secular humanism versus the Judeo-Christian ethic. And Mark Silk, writing for Religion News Service, says on the right, the far right, Judeo-Christian values are out and Christian nationalism is in. He says, in the civil war taking place on the right over anti-Semitism, classic Christian opposition to Judaism is now back on the table. Tucker Carlson has been pointedly criticizing the Hebrew Bible. He is, quote, shocked by the violence in it and shocked by the revenge in it, the genocide in it, and emphasized that, quote, Christianity alone, unique, claims that people should be treated as individuals and not as members of a collective. The former Fox News host is targeting a distinctly American 20th century concept, the Judeo-Christian consensus. So,
he's also hosting neo-Nazis on his show, so
Yeah.
it kind of all goes together.
It's hard to embrace the Judeo-Christian consensus with the neo-Nazi.
Right.
It doesn't work very well. So in the late 1930s, liberal Protestants began to employ Judeo-Christian as a way of indicating their opposition to anti-Semitism at a time when Christian had become code for anti-Jewish in fascist organizations with names like Christian Front and Christian Aryan Syndicate. Oh, those guys were fun. Did you ever hang out with the Christian Aryan Syndicate?
Never once.
It sounds like a terrible club.
During World War II, the West's enduring values began to be described as Judeo-Christian rather than merely Christian. During the Cold War and in the wake of the Holocaust, the idea that America was defending those values against what was termed godless communism became an article of America's civil religious faith. So we were big. We were big on Judeo-Christian, although we admit now it was a kind of a 20th century invention.
Yeah, but I think its motivation was positive. It was a way of saying Jews are incorporated into this ethical religious framework. They're not excluded from it.
Yeah, sometimes it had a positive intent.
Yeah. I mean, that's the origin of it, is we're not anti-Semites. We think Jews have a legitimate place in this society.
We share more than we're different.
That's right.
Yeah, some of that origin also seemed to be both including Jewish people and trying to make pretty clear who was not included in that. So not pure
who's not included.
Anyone who was not Jewish or Christian.
Yeah, but this is the early 20th century.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like there were...
But even this historian would say
Cut us
some
some
of this
slack.
is who's in and who's out,
but,
and it is Jewish and Christian and not
But we
others.
were trying to add Jews in.
I'm just saying, not
it was
purely
additive.
positive.
Because you can't...
Somewhat positive, somewhat
I
mixed,
understand,
okay?
but like back in the 1930s, it wasn't like there were that many Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists in
Yeah,
America.
that's
There were
true.
some,
Yeah,
but there weren't
yeah.
many.
Yeah,
And we were
there were
mostly
some.
worried about atheists and godless
Yeah,
communists.
yeah.
Right.
Again, there were a lot of good reasons, but
When
not
I
pure.
was a kid, Kaitlyn, about the time
Long time ago.
about the time your dad was born.
Mhm.
When I was a kid, Jerry Falwell began regularly referring to the Judeo-Christian ethic as the foundation of American values. By the mid-1980s, Judeo-Christian had become the watchword of the religious right, unchallenged among social conservatives as shorthand for their social agenda. But since then, an exclusivist Christian vision of the national future has led to an open rejection of Judeo-Christian by significant figures on the religious right. For example, Christian nationalists Andrew Torba and Andrew Isker, in their 2022 tract Christian Nationalism, A Biblical Guide to Taking Dominion and Discipling Nations, said, our movement is not a Judeo-Christian movement. We reject it. Get the Judeo out of our Christian. In his 2023 book, Mere Christendom, the prominent pastor Doug Wilson wrote that there's no such entity as the Judeo-Christian religion and calls the Judeo-Christian tradition a device used by secular man to get Christians and Jews to drop or mute their claims. That's not
I mean,
there's a point
He
there.
is correct. There is no such thing as a Judeo-Christian religion. And you can't, I've never met somebody who claims to be a Judeo-Christian.
Right.
There's Jews for Jesus, but there's not Judeo-Christians.
Right.
You know what I mean? There's Messianic Jews, but
Right.
they're not. So technically he has a point there. And he's also correct that the term and its origin came from a desire to express that both Jews and Christians in the United States shared certain values and beliefs that made them cooperate with one another towards certain ends to create a more just and tolerant society. That's all accurate, but I don't think any of us, at least at this table, would argue that those are bad things or something that needs to be deconstructed.
Right.
Yeah.
Good.
All right. Moving on.
Glad we're on the same page about that.
Silk says the old-time Christian opposition to Judaism is not the same as anti-Semitism, but
I'm not anti-Semitic. I'm just anti-Jewish. That's what he's trying to say.
Anti-Judaism.
Oh.
Can you be anti-Judaism without being anti-Jew?
Yeah.
And well, you can say it's not.
You can say I'm not Jewish.
Yeah.
Because I believe in Jesus.
There's a really fine line. I mean, even in some of the references in this article, but also in a lot of theological scholarship of like, can you critique? There are a lot of supposedly very like progressive scholars that want to, in a weird way, sound like some of the very conservative people in this article who want to call the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, abhorrent and violent and evil. And they want to say, I'm not against Jewish people as an ethnicity. I'm against this religion for its evil, violent claims.
Do you think Tucker Carlson realizes when he criticizes the Hebrew Bible that he's also criticizing the Christian Bible?
It's a very good question.
Really unaware?
He might be. I mean,
what?
That's a new thing for people to call it that if you're not a distinctly Jewish circle. So he might really think people are talking about something else. I don't know.
Okay. That's interesting. The old-time Christian opposition to Judaism is not the same as anti-Semitism, but as part of an ideology that seeks dominion over nations, it provides anti-Semites like Nick Fuentes and Tucker Carlson. That's not me calling him anti-Semitic. That's Mark Silk. So send your letters to him if you're a fan. With the theological justification they need. Whatever one thinks of Judeo-Christian as an intellectual construct, its rejection by Christian nationalists is evidence enough of its efficacy as a barrier to Jew hatred. Agree, disagree. Discuss amongst yourselves.
Well, okay. Having just done this sermon on Christian nationalism, which is now up at holypost.com or Holy Post Plus, wherever we've posted it.
Ding.
Ding, ding. Nationalism, and Kaitlyn and I did this whole episode of Getting Schooled about it. Nationalism is this ideology that says people of the same ancestry or background should have the same political power, the same political unit, right? A shared country. So to say Christian nationalism means Christians of similar ethnic or origin should run America. And you have to then, by definition, exclude Jews.
Right.
Because they are neither Christian nor are they ethnically
Right.
white Europeans, as some would say. So you have to, the whole construct of Judeo-Christian anything contradicts Christian nationalism, because your Judeo-Christian welcomes Jews into the fabric of American life, and Christian nationalism needs to exclude anyone who's not Christian and not ethnically European, as traditionally Jews were excluded from those definitions as well.
Okay. And for a counterpoint, here's Kaitlyn Chess.
Well, I agree, I think. I mean, I get a little nervous about any time that someone says, like, the only reason you could say this is if you believed this bad thing. Because there's a variety of reasons people could come to the conclusions they come to. In this case, though, the critiques of talking about Judeo-Christian values that I have heard that I think seem like faithful Christian criticisms are those that say, let's not use this term that technically is about Jewish and Christian religion, but is often used to just sort of say like this broad civic American tradition of values or Western tradition of values doesn't really value or give enough credence to the distinctives of the Jewish faith and the Christian faith and other faiths that we have kind of lumped into Judeo-Christian as this like broadly Western moral tradition. If there were people saying we are against Judeo-Christian as a term because it doesn't pay enough credence to the specificity of distinctly Christian beliefs about government, I'd be like, okay, it depends how you want to enforce those Christian beliefs about government, but I could be on board with that. It seems though like most of the people saying that actually very often their idea of a Christian government is not distinctly Christian. Like it is actually often indistinguishable from other conservative movements. It picks up different things. It's very syncretistic in a lot of ways. So that's where it seems disingenuous to me to say, well, no, we're really distinctly Christian, not Judeo-Christian, when there are a lot of Christian distinctives you seem to ignore or even abhor. And also you seem much more interested in a particular conservative political platform that kind of tacks on some Christianity than being like purely, distinctly, specifically Christian.
Well, Phil, going back to your early childhood and the Jerry Falwell and religious right.
Yeah, when I would sit on Jerry's lap and tell him what I wanted for Christmas.
Don't you think that they employed the term Judeo-Christian as a more palatable way of saying biblical? What they were saying is we believe in the authority of the Old Testament, the New Testament, the Hebrew Bible, the New Testament, Christian Bible, and all those ideas and values. We're just going to use the term Judeo-Christian because that's more acceptable in our politics than saying biblical.
Yes. Yes. Because if you had said, as part of our Judeo heritage, we're going to reject Christ as the Messiah, they'd say, no, that's not what we mean.
Right.
Yes. Oh,
But
continue.
That brings up to the point. Christian nationalists today are not interested in that framework.
And if you see Tucker Carlson talk about Christianity, or you see Matt Walsh talk about Christianity, you recognize it's being used as a cultural marker,
That's right.
not as a cohesive theological form of living.
And if it's a cultural marker, you cannot include Jews
that don't fit in our culture of Jesus.
And European Jesus.
Of European Jesus.
Right.
Okay, so did you hear last week, that I ended up in a conversation with Doug Wilson on Twitter?
I heard of it and I didn't want to look into it.
So Douglas Wilson, mentioned in this story, is a prominent pastor in very conservative Calvinist circles. His publishing company, Canon Press, is the leading publisher of Christian nationalist books. On Monday, he posted he's been in hot water over the years for what appears to be his defense of slavery, but it is very strongly his view that he reinforced last Monday, for no apparent reason other than that it's every November he tries to say things that are a little more aggressive to get people's attention, that evangelicals are timid when they don't say out loud that God approves of slavery. So I engaged with that a little bit and then ended up in a conversation with him.
You mean engaged with the conversation?
I engaged with the conversation.
Slavery.
I did not engage with slavery.
Yeah, okay.
No, Skye.
Important clarification.
Give me the benefit of the doubt, fella. And then ended up with a number of other people coming in to defend slavery as this was
on the internet?
Yeah. Can we all just take a breath here and acknowledge where we are in the year of our Lord 2025?
Yeah.
That we are having conversations among Christians about endorsing slavery.
So and the question was, this was the central question of all these conversations. Could a Christian own another person and not be sinning? Could you have God's approval for your ownership of another person? And for Doug Wilson, it's specifically in the system that existed in the South circa 1850.
Okay. Hold on. Can we pause there for a second?
Yes.
Because obviously the scriptures say a lot about slavery, both the Old and New Testaments, but the way slavery was practiced in the ancient world, in different forms in different parts of the ancient world, different times, but it was dramatically different from the kind of slavery that occurred in the United States, which was race-based chattel slavery.
Yeah.
Whereas in the ancient world, slavery was not race-based. Anybody of any race could be enslaved.
It wasn't race-based. There was chattel slavery.
I was going to say,
yes, there was chattel slavery, but an awful lot of slavery was also more akin to what our history books would equate with indentured servanthood.
Right.
Which meant there was an economic reality that some people found themselves in that they could also be extricated from.
A lot of historians are increasingly thinking a vast majority, at least in the first century, were born into slavery.
Okay. But it wasn't strictly the same as the type of slavery practice in the
I
United
am not
States.
here to litigate whether or not slavery could be justified biblically.
Right.
I'm here to say, why is it so important to some people that it can?
Yeah.
And that's the topic I want to bring up because, for example, Douglas Wilson, his first book on slavery was co-written with one of the co-founders of the League of the South, which is a neo-Confederate group, which was one of the groups that sponsored the Unite the Right March in Charlottesville, which is a secessionist group. So
Not the same as the Christian Aryan Syndicate, correct?
no, this is the League of the South, which was just formed in the 1970s and is current. A lot of the writing on this topic is to portray Southern slaveholders as the moral ones in the Civil War and Northern abolitionists as, it was the War of Northern Aggression, not the Civil War. So you see a lot of Confederate apologetics in these arguments. Doug Wilson has now written 2 books on slavery, which are both books of Confederate apologetics. He's also becoming a rising star in American Christianity, getting more and more visibility and higher profile followers like the current Secretary of Defense or Secretary of War, if you're not a woke wimp. Anywho, so I wanted to talk about this a little bit if we had time. I want to talk about the impact of neo-Confederate apologetics on the Christian far right, where we have a form of, and I don't think this is new. I think this has been around since the Civil War. It's part of the lost cause narrative, because if you're familiar with the lost cause narrative, it was the idea that the antebellum South was a fairly ideal Christian society that was trashed by the North.
And if God had done what they expected him to do, the South should have won because they were on God's side.
Yeah. And so, for example, Doug Wilson, in the year of our Lord 2025, will say explicitly the wrong side won the Civil War.
Which is so bonkers. Oh my gosh. I can't believe we have to do this.
So there's another guy named John Harris, who's a Christian influencer and podcaster, who wrote a paper similar to some of Doug Wilson's writings on the theological backdrop of the Civil War.
Yeah, well, Mark Knoll wrote a whole book on
this. Yes. John Harris's, though, is to examine the theological presuppositions of the men who wore blue and gray and to vindicate the traditional Southern position as the position of biblical authority. So their arguments, and this is also Doug Wilson, in fact, Doug Wilson has said this, that on the topic of slavery, Southern slaveholders were on firm scriptural ground, and Northern abolitionists were motivated, and this is Douglas Wilson's words, motivated by a hatred of God's word.
Yikes.
Okay, this is how John Harris summarizes this. He says, the war was essentially between 2 worlds, a world in which man creates an earthly paradise and a world in which men wait for a heavenly paradise. This is the major error of humanism. And though it seems to be morally upright when beaming in the robe of abolition, the 20th century has proven otherwise. Once the authority of God's word is left behind, there is no standard for what man deems to be either moral or immoral, causing situations that will never lead to true peace or perfection. The Civil War, and he won't call it that because he doesn't believe it was a civil war. The war between the states was a war over exegetical interpretation, both of the Constitution and of the Bible. The economic and social reasons for the war can only be understood when subservient to the 2 basic worldviews of Calvinism in the South and utopianism in the North. Ultimately, the war was a clash between those who believed in biblical authority and its hierarchical structure and those who believed in human autonomy and social ordering consistent with that view.
Okay.
And I've heard this from multiple people. It was the utopian movement of the North. It was transcendentalism. It was the Unitarians. So it was people that were rejecting the authority of God, the authority of Scripture, not looking at a literal reading of the Bible, and coming up with slavery is wrong, even though the Bible doesn't say so. And it was Southern Calvinists who were arguing, and the key theologian quoted by both Harris and Wilson is R.L. Dabney, who was kind of the official theologian of the Confederacy, who would say God in his providence, put the black man in subjugation to the white man for his betterment. And this is what these guys are picking up on today in 2025.
I mean, there are so many things, but
So it was, the South was Calvinist, the North was utopian.
Okay, but here's the problem. The world, even in the 1850s and 1860s, was much larger than the United States of America, and much larger than just this theological
And it was all
battle.
divided between Calvinists and
So
Quakers.
I think they're completely misrepresenting the view of Northern Christians.
Yeah.
That's number one. But let's put that aside for a second. Let's say they were correct about their characterization of Northern utopian Unitarians and all that. How do they explain the end of the slave trade in England? How do they explain the end of slavery in other parts of the world, also motivated by Christian views?
Douglas Wilson would say the slave trade was wrong because the Bible says you cannot steal a man and sell him.
So how did Africans end up at the centerpiece of American slavery?
Because God's providence. They were stolen, but then they were here.
If it's God's providence that Africans should be under the authority of Europeans, but you can't take Africans out of Africa, then you're saying God's permitting the violation of his own commandment for the betterment of Africans.
It's a little confusing.
It's a little bonkers.
My question is, why is it so important that we defend it?
Right.
Yeah.
Kaitlyn, help me out. Pick up the Calvinists. Should all Calvinists believe in slavery?
No.
No?
I'm a Calvinist and I don't believe in slavery.
Wait, what?
So
you're not a good Calvinist?
No Calvinist is a good Calvinist.
Touché.
What's interesting to me about this is two things. One, I have not done the deep dive you have done, Phil, on some of the people writing these books. I have seen some of their things and read shorter versions of some of what they've written. And it's interesting to me, one of the reasons seems to be a real love/loyalty of a certain tradition, history, set of theologians.
Culture.
But wrapped up in it often is this sense. I mean, I experienced this when I was a student at Dallas Theological Seminary, and I published my first book, and I included a illustration that was intended to be, critical but not condemning of a person who had been a significant person in the history of that seminary. And some people got way more upset than I thought they would when my whole point was like, this person knew scripture very well, was trying to be a faithful person, deeply and in a very devastating way misunderstood the call of God when he was in a position of authority and desegregation was starting to happen in schools in Texas. And it was like people who would have said, at least to some degree of cognitive dissonance, would have said, yeah, that was wrong. You can't say it was wrong. Like, you can't criticize this man who we hold in such high esteem. Some of these folks, it seems to be, you are so loyal to a set of theologians who might have said and done some good things. You're so loyal to a particular denomination and its tradition. And some of them are desperate for some sense of like, I come from a place and a people and everything about that. To honor it or to be loyal to it means to think all of it was perfect and faultless and Christian. That seems to be part of what's going on. The other part is, if you are trying to find a way to just kind of wholeheartedly draw on their really authoritarian, hierarchical theology, but carefully piece out the slavery part, that's really hard. And you so badly want to keep the authoritarian, hierarchical stuff that if the slavery stuff goes along with it, it just sort of has to happen. And one, I understand this on some level. I'm currently reading a book about Augustine's defense of slavery. And I have literally no tradition, family, history connection with this theologian, but I care a lot about him, and reading about how there was a very live option at the time to use some of his other theology to critique not just the slave trade, but slavery. There were theologians at the time doing that, and he didn't. Really bothers me. On some level, I get this impulse to just be like, well, if he said it and he was right about so many things and I'm really indebted to him and I'm in his tradition, I should just go along with that. But also part of his difficulty, even way back then, a different system of slavery in some ways, but in some ways very similar. For him, it was a challenge of, I see, and this is a misunderstanding, I think, but I see real good in hierarchy in general. And I see some ways in which people, I believe, are cared for in this system. and I have a really high view of God's sovereignty. So put that together. I'm going to kind of grit my teeth and say, in some way, God is using this. And Augustine, and I think probably some of the folks that Doug Wilson and others are drawing on would say a similar thing of like, this is not what should happen in eternity, but in a fallen world, there are things like government and slavery, and they're imperfect, but they're the system we have.
Do you think they would say though that husbands should not be in authority over their wives in eternity, or men should not be in authority
marriage
over women?
Some of them, I think, still would really say that
in eternity.
There won't be cops.
You're going to have to ask them that
one. Can women be CEOs in eternity? Can women be Bible teachers over men in new creation?
We won't need any.
Oh, crap. We don't need women. Is that what you're saying, Skye?
Oh, my gosh. We do have to remember that until the recent Trinity controversy, that was a common way that a lot of really intense complementarian into patriarchal stuff about gender was also justified. Was like, is it perfect? No. Will it be like this in eternity? No. But in a fallen world, you got to have some people in charge. Yeah. You got to have some systems in place.
I'm thinking it should be people that look like me.
Can I?
Exactly. And so I say all of that not to say Augustine or any of these people was right. I just say it to say, if you start accepting certain parts of the theology, and some parts you should accept, and some make a lot of sense to accept, it feels really easy to just package it all. And then you take all of that, you put it on the internet, you get incredibly defensive about your own authority being all bound up in your theology of this kind of authority in the past, and you start getting a lot of really angry followers for saying those things. And then here we are.
Here we are. Skye?
Okay, one of the fallacies that comes up a lot in this conversation and others is, well, God used something, so therefore he must endorse it.
What you intended for evil, God used for good.
Right. As Joseph said to his brothers in Egypt. But when you look at scripture, God uses all kinds of crazy things to accomplish his purposes without endorsing. He uses Pharaoh, who was evil and hardened heart, to accomplish his purposes. He uses frogs and prostitutes and the jawbone of an ass and all kinds of things to accomplish his purposes.
We don't say that.
I just did. I mean it in the,
He also said prostitutes.
It doesn't matter how you mean it.
Okay, my point is, just because God,
just a word.
I mean, because God uses something or someone does not mean God is endorsing that idea or person. And I could give a whole sermon on this right now, and I'll refrain myself. But to say that, did God bring anything good out of the evil of slavery? Undoubtedly he did, because he can redeem anything for his purposes. But that doesn't mean it is therefore good to continue something which is dehumanizing and evil. And so we do this all the time, and not just with questions as heavy as slavery, but even with, well, look how much good was happening through this leader. Therefore, they shouldn't have to go through a long process of restoration after a horrific sin. Because God's using that person. So what? God can use anyone and anything.
Okay, we got to wrap up. But the last point I wanted to make is, when you follow some of these thinkers, either Christian nationalist thinkers or pro, Confederacy thinkers, and they're talking about Christianity all the time, and they're talking about Christendom, and they're talking about, the kingship of Christ, what they don't talk about almost ever is Jesus' teaching. Almost never. Okay. Douglas Wilson, I just checked this morning. He's written 80 books.
Wow.
Yeah, 80 books. None of them on the topic of Jesus or his teaching. And this is a pastor who's written 80 books. And the only time Christ comes up is typically, he did a big promo a few years ago where they were buying billboards across the country that just said Christ is King in bold letters. And it was like a stunt. But it wasn't a stunt to draw people to the gospel. It was a stunt to say, Christ is the authority over you, and we're his representatives. And it's Christian nationalism.
Right.
It is Christians should be in charge, not Jews, because they reject Christ as king. They reject the statement Christ is king. So we're using Jesus only when it's convenient, which is to say we should be in charge. Now, ask someone to write a book about the Sermon on the Mount and apply it to life in a pluralistic society, and you got nothing. Absolutely nothing. So the biggest, as I see it in reading these people, the biggest obstacle they have to overcome to promote the Christianity they want to promote is Jesus.
That's a little bit of a problem.
Yikes.
I think it's a problem. Okay, y'all. Last word. Kaitlyn, last word. No, you can pass to Skye.
That's kind of hard to follow.
Okay.
I think it's pretty easy. If you've given authority in your life to somebody who is using the teachings of Jesus to endorse racism and slavery, I would find a different authority in your life.
In most cases, they're not using the teachings of Jesus at all.
They're using the
anything.
name of
They're
Jesus.
typically
Yes,
using
yes.
Calvin, maybe a little Augustine. They're finding Reformed fathers that were defining political engagement in Calvin's Geneva or...
Well, and I think, to be fair, most people are actually using none of them. Like no theologian, no Bible. The most popular versions of all of this
These guys
are not. Very few people, I think a lot of people are listening to clips of Doug Wilson. I don't know a lot of people are reading those books.
But I mean, Doug Wilson is
totally
up to his
But the other thing
eyeballs in the Reformers.
Yeah.
If you find yourself drawn to this kind of rhetoric about your neighbor, about people of a different ethnicity or race, you need to check your own soul. What am I getting out of this? Is it making me feel superior? Is it making me feel powerful? Is it making me feel like I have meaning and purpose again? And if I'm getting that by demoting the value of my neighbor who's different from me, you are not following the teachings of Christ.
So if you have a Christian nationalist in your life this Thanksgiving, maybe don't do it this Thanksgiving, but just offer to do a Bible study with them of the Sermon on the Mount. Just walk through the Sermon on the Mount and just see what happens.
I love that suggestion, Phil.
Thank you.
That's great.
Don't say they're wrong. Don't say Christian nationalism is stupid.
Don't throw it at them like a weapon.
Don't say the people you're listening to are stupid.
Yeah.
Just say, hey, you want to follow Jesus, right? Let's study Jesus. Okay. Hey, happy Thanksgiving, everybody. We're so thankful for you guys for helping us do this year after year after year. Skye and I have been doing this for 45 years now.
Oh my gosh.
Since before Kaitlyn was even born. And
Or podcasting existed.
before podcasting existed, and we're going to do it for another 45 years. So
Wow.
thanks. Happy Thanksgiving. See you next time. Holy Post is sponsored by Sundays for Dogs. We love our new dog, Jax. We've only had him a few months, but he's already a part of the family. He plays with our grandkids and sleeps at the foot of our bed. We'll put something under the tree for him this Christmas, and we'll keep giving him Sunday's premium dog food. He loves it. You'll be eating well this Christmas. Make sure your dog is too. Sunday's Food for Dogs is air-dried, real food made in a human-grade kitchen. Every bite of Sunday's is real meat, fruits, and veggies with no kibble. And just scoop and serve. Unlike other real food dog food, Sundays doesn't have to be refrigerated. Just real food made with care for the dog you love. And Sunday's holiday sale is going on right now. Go to sundaysfordogs.com/holypost and get 50% off your first order. Or you can use code HOLYPOST50 at checkout. That's 50% off your first order at sundaysfordogs.com/holypost. Don't miss out on Sunday's best sale of the year at sundaysfordogs.com/holypost or use code HOLYPOST50 at checkout. Holy Post is sponsored by World Relief. We talk a lot on the show about this administration's policies and their effect on immigrants and refugees. This Christmas, maybe you'd like to help, but you aren't sure how. Good news! Our trusted partner, World Relief, is helping families overseas who've been forced to flee their homes, providing food, clean water, medical care, and emergency support for those who've lost everything. And here in the U.S., refugee and immigrant neighbors are receiving housing support, English classes, and job training so they can rebuild their lives. Here's how you can help. Right now, a generous $200,000 challenge gift multiplies the impact of every donation to World Relief times 3. But this challenge ends December 2nd. So to multiply the impact of your giving and the number of families you help, you need to act now. If you want your generosity to make a real, lasting difference, start your monthly partnership with the good folks at World Relief today at worldrelief.org/holypost. Again, that's worldrelief.org/holypost. Holy Post is sponsored by the Life Application Study Bible. The Bible is meant to be so much more than just head knowledge. If we leave it there, we miss out on fully experiencing God's transformational word. Instead, Scripture should flow through everything we do, from reading and studying to understanding to letting it influence every aspect of our lives. Crafted by dedicated scholars and pastors, the Life Application Study Bible is filled with thousands of study notes, articles, charts, profiles, and more. The features teem with historical information, cultural context, and tenets of the Christian faith, but they don't stop there. They go deeper, so you can understand why Scripture matters and how it applies to your life today. The Life Application Study Bible lets you experience the life-changing power of Scripture in everyday contexts, so you can deepen your connection with God and be inspired to live transformed through a growing relationship with Christ. Learn more at lifeapplication.com. That's lifeapplication.com.
Last month, the first phase of an American brokered peace plan went into effect between Israel and Hamas. We can't know how long the ceasefire is going to last, and most experts believe that the Trump administration's plan doesn't actually address the underlying causes of the conflict. But at least for now, the major fighting has stopped. Hostages and prisoners have been exchanged, and humanitarian aid is finally reaching Gaza. With the war in Gaza hopefully over, some are now reflecting on how the war has reshaped global perceptions of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and particularly the state of Israel. Earlier this year, Peter Beinart, a writer, professor, and public political commentator, released a thought-provoking book called Being Jewish After the Desolation of Gaza, A Reckoning. In the book, he challenges fellow Jews to think more critically about their support of the state of Israel. To say the least, the book has caused a significant stir. Using Beinart's book as a template, another book has just been released, examining how Christians ought to re-examine their assumptions about the conflict as well. It's called Being Christian After the Desolation of Gaza. It features essays by American, Latino, Jewish, and Palestinian Christians who've spent years navigating the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in pursuit of a durable and just peace. Today, I'm joined by one of the book's editors, J. Ross Wagner. He's an associate professor of New Testament at Duke Divinity School and an Anglican priest. Here's my conversation with Ross Wagner. J. Ross Wagner, welcome to the Holy Post.
Thank you very much.
This book is phenomenal and really challenging. Again, it's called Being Christian After the Desolation of Gaza. You are one of the editors along with Bruce Fisk. I was looking through the contributors before I read the book and realized I think at least 3 or 4 of them have been on the Holy Post at some point. And not always to talk about exactly what they wrote about here, but those who've been following along the story of the war in Gaza will be familiar with a lot of these voices and what they're saying here. But I want to start with what inspired this book. And early on, actually throughout the volume, you all reference Peter Beinart's book, Being Jewish After the Desolation of Gaza, A Reckoning, which came out earlier this year. I'm guessing most of our audience are unfamiliar with this book, but he's an observant Jew who's writing to other Jews about what does it mean to be Jewish in this moment where the Jewish state of Israel has completely destroyed Gaza and has been accused with credible evidence of genocide. Describe a little bit of Beinart's book and why you found it to be a jumping off point for this volume.
Yeah, thanks. This volume in some ways was already underway before Peter Beinart's book came out, but with its publication, I think we found an analogy to the kind of thinking that we want to invite Christians to do. Beinart is so thoughtful. He knows his tradition very well. He has moved himself throughout his life as a journalist, as a professor, from a position of supporting a liberal version of Zionism, to being now an advocate for a single state with equal rights for all. But in this book in particular, he asks the question, what are the stories we as a community, a Jewish community, tell ourselves that blind us to what is going on right now in our name in Gaza? And he talks about a story in which we are the perpetual victims, but never the victimizers. And then he turns to scripture and to rabbinic tradition. He sees a much more complicated view of Jewish identity, in which, for example, Abraham enslaves Hagar, And his call in the book is to tell a new story in which we don't need to protect ourselves by oppressing others, that our safety and security doesn't depend on domination. And I think that's a challenge that Christians hear in our own key through the life and teaching of Jesus. Do we tell ourselves a story in which power and domination is the way God's kingdom comes on earth? Or are we witnesses to a kingdom that has already come in the death and resurrection of Christ, the one who now is at God's right hand? What kind of witness could we have in this period of time as those who know that in Christ God has reconciled the world?
I want to go back to Beinart's identity and the story he says that Jews are telling themselves. And you quote this in the book. He says, Jews have been victims of some of the worst atrocities in history. Jews in Israel and the diaspora have built our identity around a story of collective victimhood and moral infallibility. And then he goes on. The problem with our communal story is not that it acknowledges the crimes we have suffered. The problem is that it ignores the crimes we commit. By seeing a Jewish state as forever abused, never the abuser, we deny its capacity for evil. One of the themes that comes up really strongly in both what you write and many of the other contributors in this volume is the link between the way Zionism or Jewish nationalism perpetuates this story of victimhood to justify and then overlook any evil that's done in its name. The link between that and what we see happening, especially in the evangelical community here in the United States, which is also a story of perpetual victimhood, which then justifies all kinds of discrimination or even calls for violence. Can you unpack that a little bit? What do you see as the link there between the Zionist narrative of victimhood and the evangelical narrative of victimhood here in the U.S.?
There's a fantastic book by Amy Kaplan called Our American Israel that tells the story of American support for the state of Israel in its various stages. I learned reading the book, for example, that Eleanor Roosevelt was a major proponent of the creation of a state for Jews after the Holocaust, after World War II, as an example of continuing the liberal project of the New Deal. But in the 1970s, in particular after the Six-Day War, American evangelical Christians came to understand Israel's own ongoing story as integral to God's activity in the world to bring the consummation of the kingdom. And this is also a time in which evangelicals are gradually becoming much more politically active and using the levers of power with Falwell and the moral majority, for example. And Kaplan shows the complex ways in which Americans look to Israel and see themselves, but then also come to see their own story in light of what's going on in Israel. And this complicated story has in common an exceptionalism. Both America and Israel are believed to be exceptional nations, chosen by God for a worldwide mission, and therefore occupying the moral high ground. Even the notion of a kind of Judeo-Christian tradition develops during the Cold War years as a way of identifying us against an other, whether it's the forces of communism or more recently of barbarism or of militant Islam. And this common thread that we will be secure by dominating the culture, dominating our enemies militarily. This is I think a seductive promise that, at least as I read the scriptures, goes right against the character of the community that God has created in Jesus Christ, which is called to love its enemies and to display the reality of a kingdom in which greatness is shown through service and power is displayed in weakness.
One of the things that comes out again strongly throughout the book from the different contributors, already mentioned this idea of Israel as the virtuous victim that Beinart talks about. But there's this other piece. It struck me how frequently different contributors to the volume speak about the rallying of evangelical voices after October 7th to give blind support to whatever Israel did in retaliation. And I mean, people cite Christianity Today numerous times, Mike Cosper, especially the Gospel Coalition, the Christian Post, all these different sources of giving blind support to Israel's response to October 7th. But one of the justifications for that blind support is not just that Israel is this perpetual victim, but there seems to be a fear among evangelicals in the US of being labeled anti-Semitic. That if they don't give their full unwavering support to Israel, that somehow they're anti-Jewish, they're anti-Semitic. Beinart again says in his book, accusing Israel's critics of anti-Semitism is the single best way to avert one's eyes from Israel's crimes in Gaza. It kind of just shuts down the whole conversation. Explain where the fear of being labeled anti-Semitic comes from in American Christianity, and what has been the practical result of that? How has it blinded us to being a fair or applying a fair moral standard to everyone in this conflict?
That's a great question. I, as a Christian reader of Beinart's book, I can't help but lament the fact that among the terrible atrocities visited on the Jewish people, there are many that are perpetrated by Christians, by those claiming allegiance to Jesus Christ. I think there's a real reason why anti-Semitism is a concern for Christians in the West in particular, and that's because we have a terrible history of using power to persecute Jewish others. We develop theologies that justify a kind of Christian triumphalism or replacement. And since the disaster of the Holocaust, many Christian churches have rethought theological positions. We're just marking 60 years since Nostra Aetate, a Vatican II statement that has been a watershed in Christian-Jewish relations. So on the one hand, I don't want to minimize the threat of anti-Judaism, anti-Semitism in Christian theology. And we're watching around the world and in America a resurgence of anti-Semitism that has to be condemned. At the same time, to conflate treatment of Jews and Judaism with political criticism of the state of Israel, as Beinart says, in a sense, is a conversation stopper. To not be able, as many Jews are able to do, to separate criticism of the state of Israel from a love for the Jewish people. That failure to make that distinction blinds us to the injustices that are visited by Israel on Palestinians. And this is where I think Christians are tempted to become partisans of Israel in a way that is unfair, unhealthy for those who love Israel and who love Jews, and deeply unfair to Palestinians, both Christian brothers and sisters in the land and in the diaspora, and to Palestinian Muslims. We are unable to see clearly because we're looking over our shoulder.
Inverse to that, we have this blanket sense in a lot of American Christianity to just give a pass to anything the state of Israel does because we don't want to be called anti-Semitic. The inverse of that is there's this tendency to blanket all Palestinians, or certainly all Gazans, as synonymous with Hamas. And there's this horrific chapter in this book written by Gary Burge where he's going into excruciating detail on the types of bombs that are used, have been used, American weapons that have been used to destroy Gaza, and the justification of collateral damage. Some of the statistics are just blood-curdling, where the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, justify killing hundreds of civilians in order to kill one Hamas, leader. And the reason why this is often justified, and the argument that I've heard in many places, is we shouldn't really distinguish between Hamas and the civilians in Gaza because they voted for Hamas. And because they voted for Hamas, they voted for this terrorist group that wants to obliterate all Jews and all of Israel, and therefore it's okay that hundreds of innocent people die in a single bombing to get one Hamas militant. Explain why that thinking is flawed. I mean, there's some of your contributors do this in the volume, but why is it false for us to blanket all Palestinians or all Gazans as in lockstep with Hamas?
As necessary as it is to condemn Hamas's war crimes. And October 7th in 2023 was terrible. Not only military installations were targeted, but civilians were killed, hostages taken. There's no justification for that. But you're right. It's troubling to see the blanket condemnation of all Palestinians in Gaza as Hamas supporters. It's not true. Ironically, just before October 7th, that summer, Princeton University poll, widely regarded as one of the most extensive and accurate, showed widespread dissatisfaction with Hamas's rule. But the fact is, the last elections in Gaza were held in 2007. More than half of Gazans weren't even born then or able to vote. And Hamas has ruled with an iron fist. It hasn't allowed dissent. We've seen even in the last days since the ceasefire, horrific images of Hamas publicly executing those seen to be rivals to its rule. So there are so many people in this enclave who are unable to exercise their political will. Probably like most of us in America, don't follow politics closely. Don't have a say even at the ballot box in Gaza, and are trying to live their lives. And to imagine that that 20,000 or more children killed in the bombing in the last couple of years are somehow responsible for Hamas's ideology and war crimes is just perverse. I'll also mention there's one of the chapters in the book that I found deeply enlightening by Daniel Benora takes a hard look at Hamas, its history, its ideology. It's a complex movement that's got social arms, political arms, as well as its military arms. To try to understand Hamas, I think, is also incumbent on all of us as we try to think about what a future might look like for peace in this area. One of the reasons Hamas has been unchallenged in its rule in Gaza, this has been well documented in the Israeli newspapers, is that Benjamin Netanyahu allowed Hamas to receive lots of financial aid from Qatar, and wanted to lift them up as a counterweight to the Palestinian Authority. In some ways, to really to prevent their becoming an actual partner for peace on the Palestinian side.
This is an important point that we've heard before on the show that I really want to make sure people understand. There is a significant faction in the conservative end in Israel that does not want a two-state solution. They do not want the Palestinians to have statehood. They want all of the land for Israel. So one of the best ways to undermine a two-state solution is to prevent the Palestinians from having a functional government, from having a civil authority that actually works. And so in a very cynical kind of move, Benjamin Netanyahu, to your point, allowed funding to come from other Middle Eastern countries to prop up Hamas because he felt like Hamas, with some of its extreme views and rhetoric towards violence and terrorism, would undermine the credibility of the Palestinian civil government and therefore make it untenable to pursue a two-state solution. And it's so weird that you actually want your adversary to have a terrible, violent leadership in place so that you can justify destroying them, rather than having your adversaries have thoughtful, wise, moral, and virtuous leaders with whom you may actually negotiate a peace because you don't want peace. It's a terribly cynical posture.
Yeah, and this kind of devil's bargain, it worked up till October 6th, 2023. Hamas surprised Israel clearly by turning to violence because this relationship seemed to serve both parties pretty well. I think one reason we have a ceasefire right now is that the Trump administration just cut through, decided that people have to talk to Hamas's leaders in order to come to some sort of peace here. Maybe you don't want to go there right now. But,
no, before we wrap up, I definitely want to talk and get your take on where things are. But just to emphasize this point again, elsewhere in the book, Daniel's chapter is fantastic in understanding the history of Hamas and some of the Christian Palestinian response to Hamas, which is really important. But it's also valuable to remember that when the Gazans voted for Hamas back in 2006 and put them into power, the point is made, this is a quote, that it was more out of disgust at Palestinian Authority corruption than for any newfound love for a holy struggle against Israel in the West. In other words, the other option of the Palestinian Authority, they had been so corrupt and ineffectual that Gazans voted for Hamas, not because they were wanting to wage war against Israel or because they were bloodthirsty terrorists, but it was the only alternative to an otherwise corrupt government option. So they were, in their minds, picking the lesser of two evils. And to hold that vote then against all Gazans and say it justifies your execution because you voted for someone that we are now against seems very short-sighted. It gets back to this theme throughout the book that American Christians tend to hold the state of Israel to one set of standards, but hold Palestinians to a completely different set. And I really encourage people to read this book, but I don't want them to think that this is just an apologetic for the Palestinian argument, because I don't see it that way. What I think you and the other authors of this book do so well is hold up the Christian vision of peace in this land and hold all parties accountable to that vision, condemning either side wherever they depart from it. But we got to get over this idea that one side is intrinsically evil and the other side is intrinsically good, and skew our metrics based on that.
That's right. This kind of black and white Manichaean thinking isn't
Right.
serving the cause of peace, and it's not bringing safety and flourishing to Jews or to Palestinians in the land. One of the things I find most valuable in this book is just the ability to hear Palestinian voices. 4 of our authors are Palestinian citizen of Israel, 3 others from the West Bank and Gaza, who, as Christians, are deeply committed to a nonviolent resistance in the way of Jesus and have been for generations. So Daniel Benora ends his chapter on Hamas with a Palestinian Christian response that absolutely refuses the attempt of Hamas to frame this as a religious conflict, and that also doubles down on the commitment to seek justice in ways that don't take up the sword. The other authors, the same, and they have the credibility of having suffered
Right.
for decades, not acquiescing to occupation, not being silent about injustice, but doing so using what their Kairos document from 2009 calls the logic of love, that they see displayed in the life of Jesus, and also a life they believe is made possible by Jesus' presence with the community of Christ's followers here and now through the Spirit.
I affirm that completely, and benefited from listening to many of these Palestinian voices. Lama Mansour, another one that is, I've heard her speak in numerous settings, and just a compelling voice of Christian conviction on this from a Palestinian point of view as well. But I don't want to bypass the idea that so much of this book is addressing the American church here in the U.S. church, and its complicity in this whole thing. What do you believe the American church needs to rethink, especially as we are now in this moment of fragile peace, a ceasefire? What do you hope American Christians get from this book, or what do you believe our response ought to be in this moment of fragile peace?
Thank you. One of my great hopes the other authors share is that American Christians would learn more about the wider context of this latest outbreak of violence. This didn't all begin on October 7th, and that's not to minimize the horrors of October 7th, but it is to say that if we want to understand what's going on here, and the role especially of Western Christians, British and then American Christians, we have to look more widely at the story of the founding of the State of Israel, the displacement of nearly 800,000 Palestinians from their homes, the destruction of villages, the ongoing occupation of Palestinian land. This settler movement has ramped up during the last 2 years of war. The building of settlements and outposts has reached its highest level since 1967. And there is an ongoing situation of injustice that ought to concern Christians, because so much of it is being funded by our government and legitimized by the kinds of theologies that, as you were saying earlier, turn Israel into the paragon of all virtue and their opponents into the representation of evil. So I would like to see us also reckon with the way in which our theology is misshapen by commitments to nationalism, to violence, to militarism. I think that's an issue that's much more widely applicable to the American setting right now. Is the Christ that we follow this militant Christ who crushes his enemies? Or is this the Jesus who creates a community that would that would learn to love its enemies, even if that means costly love and suffering.
Before we go, current events, I'm curious to get your take. Obviously, the book was completed before this ceasefire. Do you have hope that this is a permanent ceasefire? Are you skeptical? What's your interpretation of both the Trump administration's movements here, Netanyahu's government and what it's seeking to get out of this, and the leaders that remain in Gaza? What do you think comes out of this current moment?
I'm reliant so much on the opinions of experts. As a Bible scholar, theologian, I don't claim any particular insight into the current situation. I have really appreciated the reporting that Ezra Klein at the New York Times has done, as he's just listened to people talking about this. It's a complicated 20-point plan, and the virtue of the plan is, in a sense, President Trump declared a ceasefire and then said, we'll work out the details later. Mm-hmm. And thankfully, the large-scale killing has ceased. Although since the declaration of the ceasefire, hundreds of Palestinians have been killed. Some Israeli soldiers have been killed. And so it's not as if the bloodshed has ceased. I think it's very fragile, and I think the details will be the undoing of it eventually, or possibly, and this is where I don't want to just think about human agents. Maybe by the grace of God, human actors will be able to act even better than their own plans and intentions. The ceasefire doesn't address any of the issues in the West Bank. The rapid displacement of Palestinians, even now during the olive harvest, we're reading every day about acts of violence, settler violence against Palestinians, against some of activist allies who are trying just to harvest trees from their land. And I think the failure to address these deeper causes of conflict are going to mean that violence pops up against somewhere else quite soon.
Well, the relevance of that means that what you've written and compiled in this book is still relevant. It's not just looking back at something that happened. It's an ongoing conflict of which we've, got this fragile and temporary peace, but the underlying issues have not been resolved. It will flare up again. There will be more destruction and death. So all the more reason why we as Christians in the West need to get our minds around both the history and the theology that should be guiding us in this, and grateful for your work in helping us do that. Again, the book is called Being Christian After the Desolation of Gaza, edited by Bruce Fisk and J. Ross Wagner. Ross, thank you for being with us today. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Skye.
Hi, everyone. I hate doing this, but our producer, Mike, is making me tell you to like and subscribe so that you can see more Holy Post videos and other people can see them too.